My name is Chuck Burin, originally from born in New Jersey, raised in Pennsylvania. Went to school at the University of Kansas, graduated from high school in '58, went to the University of Kansas, had a good time partying out there, finally graduated in 1963 after 5 years, barely making it, and went into the Marine Corps from there, into flight training. Got jets when everybody else was going to helicopters. I always felt I lucked out that way. And from there, went to transition to the A-4 Skyhawk, Douglas Skyhawk jet at North Carolina, and then to Vietnam, 1966. Got there in March, flew a number of missions in the Skyhawk. We were primarily doing bombing missions, and about a third of the ones that I flew were in Laos. And from there to the 3rd Marine Division. I was a ground tour for several months, and then back to the States, flight instructor. Got orders back to Vietnam, which I volunteered for. Met my wife at that time. She already had orders back, and we had a very long courtship of a total of 17 days. And got married, been 50 years next year. Yeah. And back to Vietnam again in the OV-10 Bronco, and then back to Camp Pendleton after I finished the tour over there. Got out of the Marine Corps and went back to work for the government again. Worked for the U.S. Department of Labor, Occupational Safety and Health Administration for 29 more years. Had an office in Minneapolis starting in 1984, and then added the Eau Claire, Wisconsin office a little after that, and then retired in 2003 with 4 years of civil service. I came into Vietnam the first time in March of 1966. It wasn't real hot, but the smells were the first thing that got to you. I mean, it could really smell the garbage and all the other stuff, all the other things that were there. The heat came later on. And it wasn't any different when I came back in 1969, except that I came in July this time and it was a little warm at the time. But I flew into Da Nang, only stayed there a very short while, and they put us on a C-130 and sent those of us who were assigned down to Chu Lai. Got off there and joined the squadron, quick orientation, started flying missions, I guess, about 4 days later. I had trained for a year, started off as in training with nuclear weapons. And then after about 4 months of that, they started concentrating more on the air-to-ground mission, which is what the A-4 could do also, was a multi-mission aircraft. So we did a lot of practice bombing, a lot of rockets and guns and things of that type. But no, when I got there, I felt I was pretty prepared. Of course, nobody was going to be able to hurt us. We were all young pilots and all this stuff. But I was the first lieutenant when I got there. Flew everybody's wing. I wasn't a flight lead or anything. And particular mission I always recall was one that I went out. The only thing I had for ordnance was guns, and we were going into Laos. I think it was the second mission I flew, and we were carrying leaflets. 2 pods of leaflets, one under each wing. And there was a plug in the front, and then the plug came out, the leaflets came out the back, and they were supposed to scatter all over the place. Well, the flight lead, who was a major, told me, he says, when we get up there, he says, we've looked at the area, here's the valley, I'm going to show you the valley, and you'll pick it out. I want you to fly down that valley at about 500 feet, as fast as you can go, and pull straight up. And when I tell you, when you get 90 degrees vertical going up, he says, I'm going to tell you to hit the button, blow the plugs. He says, I don't care if those things land in one big pile on the ground, and we're getting out of here. Only later did I find out that I was about 5 kilometers from one of the place called Xépôn, which everybody hears about in that. Fortunately, nobody shot at me, nobody hit me. In fact, I never got hit at all in the A-4. It was a good mission, a lot of different things we did. Helicopter escorts, supporting troops on the ground. Primary thing is supported troops on the ground. I got married February 20th and left the squadron. It was my last day in the squadron also as a flight instructor. And went to Camp Pendleton for a couple of months to transition to the new aircraft that I hadn't flown, the twin-engine turboprop that I flew there, the OV-10. My wife was previously married, so we had a 6-year-old. So I had a 6-year-old starting out with things. Easier to find a place with an animal, a pet in California in those days in 1969 than it was if you had a kid. So my wife finally found an apartment for us. Came back to Meridian, Mississippi, which is where she was from, and that's where I was an instructor. Found a house for her and stepdaughter Michelle to live in, and then I went up, visited my folks in Pennsylvania, and then I went from there to Okinawa and then Vietnam. Correspondence was primarily through letters and through audio tapes. And the little tiny 3-inch reel-to-reel tape recorder, and used those back and forth. I'd send her a tape, and then she'd send it back to me. Unfortunately, we foolishly, when I got out of the Marine Corps, went back to Mississippi and worked there for several years for Frito-Lay in the private sector. But when we got ready to move to Chicago, transfer, we got rid of all the letters I had sent to her. And it's one of those things I wish I had kept, because as I try to put together the history and put a narrative together of what I did and what we talked back and forth about, we've got to go from what we remember from all these years later, 49 years later. I do have 2 of the tapes still, so we got a little bit of that left, but most of those you used them over and over again because of the cost of them. Back in that day, even those things were expensive. We did have one R&R in Hawaii about halfway through my tour, and we're planning on going back there again in 2020 if I'm still around. I don't really get together with any of the people I went to high school with. I've been away from Pennsylvania for a number. I left in 1958 to go to college and basically didn't get back. The people you really tie up with are the ones in the military that you were with in the squadron or whatever unit it was. I mean, I still am in contact with folks that I flew in my first squadron with, and a lot of the folks that I flew for that last year I was in Vietnam. The reunion I was at was for our backseaters, the aerial observers. And these guys were the eyes of the division, so to speak. They were all ground officers. They were not pilots. Pilots were up in the front. These guys were in the back. We talked to the people in the air, and they talked to the people on the ground, and we coordinated in between. Being able to sit down and talk to these folks, and even people you didn't fly with, but you knew the mission. You knew what they did, and they knew what we did, and we always argue who actually controlled whoever's in charge of the aircraft, and I always say it was the pilot, and they always say they told me what to do. But it was very interesting. I met folks this time that went back as early as 1966 in Vietnam, flying the 01 Bird Dog in the back seat. Met folks that flew. One day they'd be in a propeller airplane, the next day they'd be in a helicopter, the next day they'd be in a jet doing a mission. We stayed in the same airplane most of the time. So it's really different to talk to these folks and to get their experiences and what they did that was different sometimes than what we did. They were not really part of the squadron, and yet they were. Met one gentleman down there, retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, whose name happened to be U.S. Grant. And looked at Sam's logbooks and we're just shaking our heads and realizing all the different things he did over about a 3-week period, including getting shot down in North Vietnam. Fortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to ever fly up there. I happened to be there during the bombing halt in 1966. And again in 1969-70, the airplane I'm flying, we just didn't go up there. Our job was to support the guys on the ground, the Marines on the ground. And that was the best mission I think I ever flew. No air conditioning in the plane, so it got a little warm, but really gratifying to talk to and run into people from time to time who maybe I didn't support, but my squadron mates did. And to have them, I was in Duck, North Carolina, really good one, Duck, North Carolina on vacation in probably 2004, 2005, at a restaurant, and I had my hat on that had the Bronco on it, and this waitress comes over and says, "The gentleman over there would like to buy you a drink." I go over and talk to him, and he said, "Yeah," he said, "I was in Force Recon," and he said, "You were an OV Temple?" I said, "Yes, I was. I was a hostage FAC," and he said, "That's the call sign." And he tells his grandchildren who are sitting with him that you wouldn't be here if it weren't for guys like this who came out to the field to find us, to help us if we were under attack, and to be able to get us pulled out of the area. And it's gratifying to know that there are people out there who appreciate the work he did, and will let you know about it too. Same thing. I said this reunion was a different one, a little different than most of them. Most of them it's pilots and some of our enlisted crew that come in. This is the first time I've been to one that we had a lot of observers. In fact, as pilots, we were secondary. There were 4 or 5 of us there, but it was all about the AOs and all about what they did. And of course, we were doing what we're doing now. We were trying to interview some of them to get their impressions of our aircraft and the other things that they'd flown. And it was interesting. There were some strong discussions over why ours wasn't worth a darn and why the ones they flew in were so much better. But now that also had the opportunity while I was out there to go up to Chino, California, to a group up there that's just purchased a number of the aircraft that I used to fly. And they're hoping to get them back in flying condition. And there were two of them there that I actually flew, one of them in Vietnam, another one at Camp Pendleton. And to have the folks up there, younger folks up there, say, oh, we're really sorry for the shape these are in. They're not very good shape. They've been setting out for a long time. But to let them know that we appreciate the fact that somebody is paying attention to these things and is going to get some of these things back in the air again. So we said, don't worry about their condition. We're just happy they're still here and they still exist. In fact, I also got to go back and meet the retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, who was actually the impetus behind the aircraft that I flew, the OV-10 Bronco. He's still alive today. He was a Corsair pilot in Korea and helped do the design work, some of the design concept work, and then he was actually still one of the squadrons I was in later on between some of the other things that he did. But to see KP Rice is still around today also, and be able to have a chance to talk to him.